Craig Smoak.
Notre Dame, after the loss to Cincinnati, has gone about their business and just kept winning and won big, huge over the weekend. And now, if they have any hope of that college football playoff, they need some things to happen, but they have to take care of their own business. And a heavy favorite against Stanford coming up this weekend. We're joined by Brian Driscoll, Irish Breakdown on Sikkim 365 Radio. Brian, why are they better? Is it just because of who they're now playing, or have they gotten better in certain aspects of their game?
Well, obviously, when you play a lighter schedule, you're going to look better, right? I mean, I'm not going to sit there and say, like, no, if they were playing Cincinnati and Wisconsin again, they'd be blowing them out the same way. Playing a softer schedule has helped them. But, look, there's also changes they made when they went into the bye week. Notre Dame's bye week this year was literally right in the middle of the season. They played 6, had a bye week, and then played 6. They made some changes and adjustments, and especially offensively, they went out and said, hey, look, that what we're doing, who we thought we were going to be, is not what we're good at. We have to figure out what is our team good at. They started going a little bit more, started throwing the pass game, using the pass game to kind of set up the run. They attacked the perimeter more frequently in more diverse ways. They started attacking down the field a little bit more effectively. And then the offensive line started playing better as the competition got worse. And that's helped them really get going offensively. Defensively, it's really just been about Marcus Freeman learning his players and his players learning Marcus Freeman. And that unit has continued to click more and more and more and more. The reality is twice this year now, Notre Dame's defense has scored more points than their opponents in those games. They outscored Wisconsin, and then this past weekend they outscored Georgia Tech. So when your defense is giving up 9 points in 3 games and twice is scoring more than your opponent, you're going to be a pretty good football team.
Brian, just reading some tweets about Notre Dame over the weekend, it appears that a lot of the fan base, a lot of people that cover it, thought that 2023 was kind of the year, the way that the recruiting was stacking up and how guys would kind of develop into that. But after this year, do you feel like maybe they're a year ahead of that pace of where people thought they would be in contention for the CFP again?
It amazes me how many Notre Dame fans have lowered the standard at Notre Dame. Brian Kelly's in his 12th year. Why are we waiting till year 14 for him to have a championship caliber football team? Notre Dame should have been this team all year. That's my frustration. You know, a lot of things that we talked about early in the year when I was on you guys before, things that I talked about on my show before the season, that they needed to be offensively is what they eventually went to. And it was like, why did you wait so long to do that? And that's really been the story of Brian Kelly's tenure is, he waits until it's too late to make the changes, whether it's firing Brian Van Gorder, whether it's changing his offense, whatever the case may be. And that's the frustrating thing is because what we saw Saturday against Georgia Tech, that's the team we should have seen for most of the season. So I don't understand why. I mean, Notre Dame's got, 3 potential first-round picks on the defensive side of the ball. They've got one of the best running backs in the country, one of the best tight ends in the country, and they're playing a schedule where you've got, one team that's got fewer than 3 losses on your schedule. Why wasn't this the year? Why isn't next year the year? So, no, when you've done what Notre Dame's done, your expectation every year should be to compete for a championship. You don't get 3-year rebuilds when you've been at a school for 12 years.
So Stanford coming up next. They have not been a very good team this year. Just your thoughts on the Cardinal entering this game, and does Notre Dame have that self-motivation given that it's not, a 9-8 win team that's coming in that's pretty good? It's a team that's obviously floundering and going the opposite direction.
Well, I think Brian Kelly's going to still have in the back of his mind. He's a competitive guy, right? He's going to have in the back of his mind some of the spankings that Stanford put on him when he was trying to get his program going early in his career. So I think he's going to have that in the back of his mind. I think the other thing too is what we've talked about at the beginning is Notre Dame's not necessarily just playing Stanford and then it is what it is.
Right.
Notre Dame's playing Stanford with the thought of, we know we have to go out there and play to a certain level of standard at Notre Dame. People know we are one of the 4 best teams in college football. And so I think that's the mindset going into this game is it's not about Stanford at all. It's about Notre Dame. It's about us. Are we going to play to the standard on all 3 phases of the game that we've set for ourselves and that we know we have to play at to let the committee know that we are a national championship contending team, which is what I think you need to be one of the 4 playoff teams.
So, as you know, Florida now the latest team to have a job opening, and I think SMU probably by the end of the week will be the next. And I'm not trying to compare SMU to Florida or even Notre Dame. And I saw where it was an SI story about Brian Kelly and USC, as you know, with Dave Aranda and how hot he's become as a commodity with what he's done at Baylor, with the thoughts and speculation of him being a candidate elsewhere. Why would he ever leave Notre Dame? Isn't that one place when you're there you don't leave unless they ask you to?
I think it's just more of the media kind of looking for something to talk about to generate discussion and page views and all those type of things. Look, do I think Brian Kelly could be enticed to leave Notre Dame? Sure. He's 60 years old. He talks a lot about living in Florida when he retires. I mean, if Florida Gators wanted to offer him $10+ million a year, would he consider leaving Notre Dame? Sure. I would imagine so. But he's not going to USC. And that's the kind of funny thing is he knows what kind of dumpster fire that program is right now. And he understands as a coach, like most coaches do, there's a reason every time there's an opening at USC, there's all these big names that get mentioned and they never hire any of them because most coaches know there's a lot I have to deal with at USC that I don't have to deal with at, Baylor, for example. So, yeah, I may make more money, but I'm going to be taxed a whole lot more, too. And I'm going to have to deal with crazy expectations of, 2017, I could be a team that's, 11 wins and a year later I'm on the hot seat because we're not winning 11 games again. I don't know if it's as attractive a job as the media thinks it is, and it's definitely not a place that the coach of Notre Dame leaves for. As long as you said, as long as he's welcome back in Notre Dame, and of course Brian Kelly is certainly someone that Notre Dame would like to keep around.
Brian, what do you think the best scenario for Notre Dame is this weekend on getting into the playoff and seeing how the next 2 weekends really, how the chips would have to fall?
I think Notre Dame needs two definitively happen. Number one, I think they need Oklahoma to beat Oklahoma State. I think that's one thing that they need to happen because I don't think either one of those two teams can upset each other, or beat each other twice, excuse me. And so if Baylor loses this weekend at Texas Tech, which I don't expect to happen, or if Oklahoma beats Oklahoma State, then that sets up rematch, and I think they kind of cancel each other out. I think that's something that helps Notre Dame when it comes to the Big Ten kind of gaining on them. And then the other one is they need Georgia to beat Bama. I think if those two things happen, I think Notre Dame gets in. I think it'll be at that point in time, it'll be Georgia, Ohio State, Cincinnati, and Notre Dame, assuming Cincinnati runs the table. So I think those are the two things that Notre Dame needs to have happen here over the next couple of weeks.
I guess it's sticking with looking ahead. I mean, how do you think they would stack up? Obviously, Georgia looks like an absolute juggernaut right now, but how do you think Notre Dame stacks up with some of the other top teams in the country?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I'm more concerned about Ohio State than I am Georgia.
Fair.
And that's not to say that Georgia's not a great team. Georgia's a phenomenal defense. I'm still not sold that Georgia's going to be able to go out there and be a great offense against a great defense. I mean, in my opinion, they faced one great defense all year, and they didn't score a single offensive touchdown in that game, that being the Clemson game. Now, I know Georgia has some receivers out, but they still have most of those receivers are still out. I don't think they're a great offensive team. And I think that's the kind of team Notre Dame would be able to match up with more because of how good their defense is. And we saw that Marcus Freeman did a pretty good job against that defense or that offense last year when he was at Cincinnati. And so the teams that concern me are more a team like Ohio State. Before Oklahoma lost, I had mentioned Oklahoma's a team that scares me a little bit more. Not scares me, but is a worse matchup for Notre Dame simply because they can score. And in the college football playoff, as we've seen since it started in 2014, unless you have two SEC teams playing against each other, it's about who can score the most points. And I think you can get into a score fest with Georgia where you could beat them 27-24. I don't think you could score 27 points and beat Ohio State.
Yeah, what they did Saturday was awesome. I mean, it was almost awe-inspiring. I mentioned Brian Kelly, and you kind of discussed his future, how long he's been locked into Notre Dame. But what about Marcus Freeman? Are those now his name's out there, right? He's the hot coordinator. And is the plan eventually for him to be the next head coach, or do you feel like he'll be somewhere else? Then maybe something happens with Notre Dame down the road.
Well, Notre Dame has never addressed anything publicly about Coach Freeman being the next head coach at Notre Dame. There was a brouhaha about comments that Brian Kelly made this summer. He talked about Marcus Freeman's going to be the next head coach. He was referring to just next head coach from his staff being hired as a head coach. I wrote an article yesterday at irishbreakdown.com where I said, look, it's time for Notre Dame to step up and do whatever it takes to keep Marcus Freeman here. Because number one, he's doing a great job as a coach. His recruiting has been at an elite level since he got here. And to me, he is someone that you don't necessarily want to lose him because you may not lose him to a Cincinnati. You may lose him to a place where you can't get him back in 3 to 4 years when Brian Kelly retires. So, sort of like what we saw at Oklahoma, even though Oklahoma never did it officially, I think there was always the expectation that he would kind of take over, Lincoln Riley would take over when Bob Stoops left. We saw this at Ohio State, obviously with Ryan Day sort of being the eventual heir apparent to Urban Meyer. Notre Dame needs to make sure that Marcus Freeman understands that you are that guy and rewrite the contract and give him some more money and make sure he knows that. I don't care if they do it officially or publicly, meaning publicly. I don't care if they do it behind the scenes, which actually I'd prefer it that way. But they need to make sure they do whatever they can to keep him here, because I do believe if he stays here for the next couple of years and continues to learn under Brian Kelly and then, of course, what he learned under Luke Fickell, I absolutely think he's a guy that could be that next head coach at Notre Dame. And there'd be a lot of Notre Dame fans and a lot of Notre Dame players that'd be very excited about that.
So are you saying it would take something maybe more like that to make sure that it would take something more? Like USC would have to call Marcus Freeman and say, it's yours, Marcus, as opposed to, say, Virginia Tech and that's not a bad one either, or like a Memphis or somebody who I don't think will be open, but just for example.
Yeah, I don't think that's the job he would leave Notre Dame for now. Now, maybe in a couple of years, if he's not getting some better offers, he might consider that. But, when you're at Notre Dame and you're the defensive coordinator at Notre Dame and you're 35 and you're a hot commodity and you're recruiting the way he's recruiting, you say, okay, I could take the Virginia Tech job now, or we could come back next year, compete for a title again next year or the next 2 years. And now all of a sudden when Penn State comes open or Michigan comes open or Tennessee comes open, you're just throwing out random jobs, not that that's going to come open. You get the point that I'm making. To me, those are better jobs than a Virginia Tech or an SMU or a job like that. I just don't see that making a lot of sense for Coach Freeman. Plus, he's always been a Midwestern guy. He played at Ohio State. He's coached at Ohio State, Purdue, Cincinnati, Notre Dame. I think that's also going to lend a little bit to him saying, hey, look, let me stay here. Let me continue to build. He's still only 35. He doesn't need to rush to take a head coaching job this now. I'd rather be the head coach at Notre Dame at 38 than the head coach at Virginia Tech at 35.
You mentioned the possibility of who you would be worried about in the Big 12. Oklahoma's offense is not the same. You've watched them, haven't you, Brian, as far as
I have, yeah.
They have really struggled. Oklahoma State has run the conference. So I don't know if Oklahoma has any kind of firepower right now with anybody.
Well, I think as far as a matchup against Notre Dame, that concerns me more than it would be. And again, when I made this comment, it was 2 weeks ago. It was before they played Kansas, right? So that's the point that I was making. It was before their loss. It was before we've seen them struggle. Because the concern I have about Oklahoma too is when you look at that team, it's a very young team. You've got a freshman quarterback, you've got an offensive line that's replacing a lot of new pieces. You've got a lot of young offensive linemen. Your best receiver is a sophomore. Marquise Williams is a freshman. That's not a team I necessarily want to give a month to regroup and prepare, is the way that I look at that. And as much as they're not what they used to be, they're still a team that's averaging 39 points per game. They're still a team that has had that moment where, okay, they got hot today and they looked better today. And then the next week they're going to score 14 against Baylor. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes them dangerous, is you don't know what you're going to get. Whereas Oklahoma State is a phenomenally well-coached, hard-nosed, gritty football team, but you can score 24 and beat them.
Well, that's good. All right, if he calls back, Paul, we're done. Thank you. That's it. All right, Brian Driscoll, who covers Notre Dame Irish Breakdown, appreciate his feedback on that. Yeah, a lot of you on the chat room were questioning about Brian and mentioning Oklahoma. I wanted to give him a chance to follow up on that. You can disagree with him, and that's fine. But Oklahoma State can score some points now. They can put up some points, but they're more likely to beat you like they did Baylor. And like they might Oklahoma in a game that they are going to keep that thing not dummied down. That's just the way they can play. That's the way their defense just doesn't get into many boat races.
No, they don't, but their offense is not that great. I mean, it's not one that I think you have a lot of confidence going into a shootout scenario. Not that they play in any shootouts because their defense is good. I think their offense is good enough to balance them out well, but it's not so good that you would take them and go like, yeah, they'll beat Georgia, or I'd take them against Georgia. I think their offense is the missing piece to putting them in that same category of some of those other teams that are at the top of the playoff rankings. They're not bad, but they're just not like great with Spencer Sanders and Jalen Warren and company. But they're effective enough, that's for sure. And I'm with them. I think I'd much rather play Oklahoma right now than Oklahoma State. Are you kidding? I don't care what style you play. I'd rather play Oklahoma than play Oklahoma State right now. And I get his point about the Oklahoma and the explosive and the firepower and all of that, but that doesn't even seem to be in the ballpark right now for them. I know they beat Iowa State, but just something a little off at the moment. They don't quite look like a playoff team to me, but Oklahoma State does.
Oklahoma State has basically kept everybody to, about 24, 25 points and lower every game. Mm-hmm. They have just not allowed nobody, to get into any kind of a just one of those. Sometimes you just get into one of those games. They just won't let that happen. And a lot of it is the fact that they run the ball well as well. And Warren wasn't even somebody that played much in the game against Texas Tech, and they didn't need him that much in that game either.
And if you look at Oklahoma State's only loss is a very, very close game on the road at Ames in an Iowa State desperation moment and a big moment for them where they needed to win a big game and keep pace in the race. So, yeah, I mean, if that is their only loss, it's not in any way, it's to a team that's mediocre, but it's not a bad one when you look at the scope of it when it happened.
Well, one of the things that they don't do is even when they do score a lot of points, which they haven't done that much. Against Kansas, they blasted them 55-3, 63-17 TCU, and I watched a lot of that game. They don't even let games like that, when they are scoring a lot of points, to where they get sloppy on defense to give up a couple of trash touchdowns at the end to let people get into the 20s or 30s. All right, when we come back, we went and focused in on Notre Dame. Up next, we focus on Utah. Wow.